Hi, my name's Tre Goodhue and I'm the Assistant Curator of Education here at the Tri-Cities Historical Museum. I want to welcome you to the final segment of our three-part series entitled We Were Here Too, exploring West Michigan's queer past. I want to thank those of you who have already watched the previous two segments covering the Saugatuck, Douglas, and Grand Rapids area, and encourage anyone who might have missed the previous two segments to go check those videos out on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. This final segment covers the area of Holland, Michigan, with presenter Jeffrey Sorensen, who is the director of Out on the Lakeshore, a queer community space in Holland. Jeffrey not only brings to us the history of Holland, but also three separate segments of interviews he has done with residents of Holland who shared their personal experience with the queer history of the area. Without further ado, I'm going to let Jeffrey take it away.
My name is Jeffrey Sorensen, and I'm the director of Out on the Lakeshore, which is an LGBTQ+ community center in Holland, Michigan. And we're here today to talk a little bit about the history of the LGBTQ+ community right here in Holland. Most people don't think of Holland having a rich LGBTQ+ history, but it actually does. So I'm going to just really scratch the surface. I've got a lot to talk about today, and I've got a lot of interviews to share with you of people who lived those experiences. But like I said, we're just scratching the surface, and there's so much more history than what I have for you today. I do want to recognize that there's so many people that came before me, and those people really paved the way for those that are here now. Some of these people are still around and still doing the work after decades of putting in time to promote and support the LGBTQ+ community. And some of these people are no longer with us. But it's important to recognize that those people really set the tone and helped get us to where we are today. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the history at a national level, because it's important to sort of set that tone and understand what was happening in the country to therefore understand how that sparked what was going on locally as well. So in the 1960s and even before that is when the civil rights movement was really taking off. And one thing most people don't recognize is Martin Luther King Jr.'s key organizer, Bayard Rustin, was actually a gay man. And this intersectionality brought some exposure to the gay rights movement as well. And it led to the first American-based political demands for fair treatment for gays and lesbians in mental health, public policy, and employment. And in 1969, on June 28th, we had the Stonewall Uprising, which is what's considered to be the beginning of the gay rights movement as we know it now, where patrons of the popular Stonewall Inn in New York City fought back against ongoing police raids at the local neighborhood bar. And it's still considered to be that watershed moment that sparked gay pride, the Pride month of June, and it's been commemorated ever since the 1970s with pride marches and festivals. In 1970, we had our first Pride Center formed in Albany, New York, and Pride was held on the first anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising in June of 1970 as a remembrance of that uprising in 1969. Over the next decade, several LGBT and civil rights organizations were formed on a national level, including PFLAG, which is the Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, the National Organization for Women, the Human Rights Campaign, and several others. We also saw the first March on Washington for gay rights in 1979. And while all of that was happening on a national level, there was movement here locally in Holland as well, with student John Stout from Hope College forming the Gay and Lesbian Student Union in 1978. And in the 1980s, while there was traction on the gay rights movement, we also saw the AIDS epidemic begin. And this really set back the gay rights movement because it provided exposure to the LGBTQ plus community in a way that hadn't been done before, but it was in a negative way, promoting this disease that was spreading throughout that community primarily. But in 1983, Representative James Dressel, who was from Holland, co-sponsored a bill that would have amended the state's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to include sexual orientation as a basic civil right. The bill did die in the committee, but an ongoing debate began at that time that continues even until today, and we continue to hear conversations about the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. Representative James Dressel then came out as gay and was defeated in the next year, 1 year short of earning the state's pension. And then in 1990, we started to see even more traction on both sides of the gay rights movement. So in 1993, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was put in place. But in that same year, sexual orientation was added to Hope College's sexual harassment policy, stating that you cannot harass someone for their sexual orientation. Well, things were looking good at Hope College and sexual orientation was added to their sexual harassment policy. Just 2 years later, Hope College created an institutional statement on homosexuality that states that the college will not provide recognition, financial or logistical support for groups whose purposes include the advocacy or moral legitimization of homosexual behavior. The statement also advocated for fair and kind treatment for people with homosexual orientation. So this sparked more conversation at the local level of how do we promote that diversity and inclusion of the LGBTQ plus community. So at Hope College in April of 1995, something called the Les-Bi-Gay Issues Week was held at Hope College. But later that year, Hope College's Dean's Council responded to that Issues Week. And the following year, acceptance of homosexual people was discussed by a panel of pastors at the third conversation of human sexuality entitled Sexual Ethics and Community at Hope College. That same year, President Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act into law that defined marriage as a union between one man and one woman. Shortly after that, in the same year, in 1996, a visiting scholar, Yoshima Kaji, spoke at Hope College on AIDS in the LGBTQ plus community. And at this time, more exposure was being brought to the forefront when it came to the LGBTQ plus community, especially because at a national level, celebrities were beginning to come out, such as Ellen DeGeneres, who came out in April of 1997, heralding a new era of gay celebrity power and media visibility. But even with celebrities coming out and supporting the gay rights movement, there was still a lot of scrutiny. And in the fall of 1997, an openly gay student at Hope College reported death threats and was beaten. The next year, Hope College hosted 2 workshops that were entitled Confronting Homophobia by Jerry Kasuba. And in the same year, an openly gay female Bible study leader at Hope College had her position revoked due to her sexuality. In 1999, Hope College Campus Ministries presented a Hope College Chapel series called Setting Love in Order, a series on human sexuality with key speaker Mario Bergner, who was an ex-gay minister. This, of course, provided a lot of insight into the ex-gay movement, again, setting things back for the LGBTQ plus community here locally. So in response to that, in March of 1999, just 1 month after Mario Bergner spoke, the Hope College Gay, Lesbian, or Bisexual Equality, also known as GLOBE, sponsored a presentation by gay minister Mel White. This presentation was initially sponsored by the Hope College Student Congress, but they later rescinded that invitation. In March of 1999, a human clothesline was then formed in the Pine Grove, showing support for the LGBTQ plus students at Hope College. And in the same month, Tracy Orr, who is a Lesbians Hope College graduate, spoke on her experiences at Hope College and what she went through as a student. The Hope College Student Committee announced a panel discussion on homosexuality that was then to follow spring break that year, but the Student Congress then canceled that panel discussion due to scrutiny. And in October of 1999, a gay encounter was held in Pine Grove, held by Globe for the National Coming Out Day. This was a day in which gay and lesbian students of Hope College and their supports could play frisbee, read, and study in the Pine Grove. This was one of the first LGBT events held at Hope College in somewhat of a public setting. And then in fall of 1999, Metro Source magazine listed Hope College in the top 5 questionable schools for gay students to attend.
Carol Tanis. And I'm Judy Parr, Carol's sister.
I'm Karen Prince, and my pronouns I use are she, her.
So I'm Kristen Gray, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a clinical psychologist by training.
My name is Jane Dickey, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I have lived in Holland, in the Holland area, when coming in 1972 to teach in the psychology department, and then was director of women's studies at Hope College at, let's see, when did we start that? In around 1992 or something, for about 20 years or so, something like that.
I have been in Holland 54 years at Hope College, which makes me the senior employee among its 900 plus employees.
There were closeted faculty members at Hope College in 1972. They didn't speak much about their own orientation. They just, lived their lives, and I think even in that early time, gay students were apt to kind of sense or figure out, and were likely to find some of those folks who became very, very important to them in that early time. And interestingly, when people think of Hope College, they often think, well, it's very conservative, and so it must have been really terrible for LGBT people since forever. But interestingly, the chaplain who was chaplain when I first arrived knew that there were students who were gay. They trusted him, and they came and spoke with him, and he gave them the key to his house so they could come and meet in his living room. So they had a place where they could meet safely and be together. Later, Jerry Van Heest was chaplain, and he and I in the 80s and 90s went into dorms and did talks on homosexuality is what we called it then, and the Bible, and put a bunch of myths to rest, basically trying to help move students beyond homophobic reactions.
So I grew up assuming, as did other people I grew up with in my conservative evangelical community, that sexual orientation was a moral choice. Some people made bad, reprehensible choices. Over time, as I became a psychological scientist and started reporting on psychological inquiries into sexuality and sexual orientation, I came to understand that sexual orientation is a natural, enduring disposition, especially so, and most clearly so, for males. And so that was the first bit of knowledge that changed my thinking. The second was I came to understand the importance of the human need to belong. We are social animals. We are made for close, supportive, connected relationships to people that care about us. And that's led me to be a proponent of marriage and an annual contributor to the National Marriage Project, which is supporting marriage in the United States, marriage and family values. It just so happens that that need to belong is important for all human beings, not just those of a particular sexual orientation. And so learning about sexual orientation as a natural disposition and coming to appreciate the importance of the human need to belong, and then having my understanding of what biblical wisdom actually teaches about covenant partnerships, all together changed my mind 180 degrees, and I became an advocate for covenant partnerships for all people.
I came to Holland in 1987 for a job at Hope College. And I came from Minnesota, and I thought Michigan would be very similar to Minnesota, and I found out that it's quite different. At least West Michigan is quite different from my home area, particularly around issues of diversity. So I grew up in a very white area, but also a very socially and religiously liberal area. When you grow up in an area, I don't think you know kind of where that area falls on a continuum. And so I moved here and called home to tell my folks some of the things I was experiencing. And my mother said, "Oh, good heavens, you've moved to the 1950s. So it was quite an interesting transition to go from a pretty liberal and progressive area and to come here and discover, at least in the late 80s, that I was not in that kind of an area. So that was an interesting adjustment for me.
We came to know a man who was working on the scene within the church in evangelicals, and he had an organization called Evangelicals Concerned. Ralph Blair, who was a psychologist and really a theologian, and he was a counselor in New York City. Dave Myers and I got to know him through his writing, and we invited him to come and speak at Hope College. So we went to and again, it was the same kind of folks. It was Jerry Van Heest. It was Stan Rock, who was at Western Seminary. It was Wayne Bolton in the religion department, and it was Dave Myers and me. And we went to the president and said, "This is what we want to do," because we knew it might be controversial. And he agreed. This was Gordon Van Wylen. He agreed to let this speech happen, have Ralph Blair come and speak. But he said the only way we can do it, will allow you to do it, is if you have a respondent from the religion department at Hope and you have a respondent from Western Seminary. Okay, we agreed, that was fine. Well, the thing was, Ralph gave this wonderful talk, and in it, a great, very much depth in faith and biblical ideas and the history of how LGBT folks had been treated over the centuries. Afterwards, when the person from Western stood up, he said, "Well, I essentially agree with most of what Ralph said." And the same thing happened with the person from the religion department at Hope. And I know that Gordon Van Wylen, whom I very much admired and got along with, mostly, was seething. I mean, I think he expected that the response from the seminary and from the religion department of the college would be, "Well, this is all wrong," and so forth. But they actually pretty much agreed with what Ralph had said. And all those students are sitting there, like 300 students are sitting there in faculty listening to what's just been presented. And you can't erase that, you can't take that away. So that was a moment where you might have expected someone to say, "No, you can't bring that person in." Credit to Gordon Van Wylen, he believed a college should be a place where you can discuss things. So indeed we got to hear Ralph at that time.
So for me, it was very interesting when I first moved here. Folks who later came out to me were not out. And it was interesting that it's not that they it wasn't just me, right? So it wasn't, this is a new friend and I'm going to be careful, which I think is quite common. But they weren't out to anyone. And after I'd been here for 5 or 6 years, there were some kind of difficult things that happened in Holland. And at that point, with some crises, including a member of the LGBTQ plus community who died by suicide, people began to come out. I think there was a sense of, we have to talk, we have to let people know that we're here. And so it was about that time, I would say the mid-90s, that I started to be more included, or that people came out more to friends and church members and folks that we knew.
As over the last half century, and especially over the last 30 years, there's been a dramatic change in increasing acceptance for gay and lesbian people. For example, in Gallup national surveys, it wasn't very long ago, 20 plus years ago, that only a third of Americans supported gay marriage. Today, 2/3 do. That's just a dramatic change in a very thin slice of history.
If I think about like the late 90s moving forward, Hope has had a series of what I think of as kind of horribly unfortunate events. So some things that happened that were quite harmful to our queer students and faculty and staff. Things that didn't have to happen. There was Mario Bergner was brought in as a speaker, and he is someone who was part of Exodus International and the ex-gay movement. He came and spoke on campus, had very, very tight controls on how anyone could ask a question. It was an incredibly painful speech. Certainly our students were present. There were times when messages were given from our chapel. So I remember being in the balcony, which is where our LGBTQ plus students would kind of gather in those years. And the person who was preaching said, there are the sheep and the goats, and I am asking the goats to leave. For me, there just is never a place for that. There's never a place for that. One of our students was standing next to me weeping, and the student's mother was there as well. And the student turned to the mom and said, "We have to go now. This man has said the goats have, like we have to go now." And the mom said, "We are not leaving."
And then we get into the 2000s. And at this time, a lot of traction was gaining on the LGBTQ plus rights movement, along with all other civil rights movements as well. But in February of 2000, a Hope College student's car was vandalized just for having a rainbow painted on it. And later that year, a gay and lesbian film series was organized by a Hope College student, Blythe Davis, after 1 year independent study. And then that film was delayed by Hope College administration to convene a task force to examine that series as a whole. Well, they still allowed Blythe to carry out the film for the purposes of the course that she was in. They delayed allowing the film to be publicly presented. But then in the beginning of January, Blythe Davis's gay lesbian film series, A Life Not Just an Issue, A Lens for Understanding Homosexuality, was held in the Moss Auditorium at Hope College. In March of 2001, the Gay Straight Alliance for Awareness formed at Hope College in response to handling that film series. The Hope College GSAA in April of 2001 was denied recognition as a student organization at Hope College. And that meant that in the fall semester of 2001, the GSAA was then not allowed to meet on Hope College. And in November of 2001, a task force on homosexuality was formed in response to Hope College's Campus Life Board's decision on denying the GSAA recognition. And in January of 2002, Hope College denied the GSAA recognition for the second time by the Campus Life Board. And then outside of Hope College, but still locally, in July of 2001, the local chapter of PFLAG, Holland Lakeshore, was founded by members Don and Carmen Bergman, Dean and Mary DeRitter, Fred and Joan Hamlin, Nelson and Peg Hart, and Jack and Joe Vandenberg. This organization is a local chapter of the national PFLAG organization, and it was focused on supporting the family members of LGBTQ plus people, but also supporting the LGBTQ plus people who did not have accepting families. That organization started meeting every month in 2001, and then in September of 2001, the Hope College Gay and Lesbian Alumni Organization hosted its first meeting during homecoming. At the end of that year, Take Back the Campus posters with anti-gay statements appeared all over Hope College campus. And in April 2002, two LGBTQ plus organizations called Graces and Globe were described and named in the Task Force on Issues of Sexuality report to Hope College president. Graces was a student organization that provides a place for Hope community to discuss issues on human sexuality and offers educational programming to support this goal. Graces did not advocate a singular position on any particular issue. Globe was a support group for trans and gender nonconforming students at Hope College, but was not funded by Student Life. And then nationally, in June of 2003, the US Supreme Court struck down the homosexual conduct law, which decriminalized same-sex conduct. In June of 2004, the first Pride event in Holland was held by PFLAG Holland Lakeshore, who sponsored author Melanie Morrison, who spoke on telling the truth about our lives at Grace Episcopal Church. And then in 2005, Hope College professor David Myers spoke about homosexuality on campus, and he published a book called What God Has Joined Together, The Christian Case for Gay Marriage, showing support for the LGBTQ plus community. In spring of 2006, Mark Yarhouse spoke in response to Dr. Myers' lecture. In 2006, again, we had Hope College professor Miguel de la Torre, who wrote letters that were published in the Holland Sentinel that, one, challenged the focus on families' anti-gay stance, and two, a letter that apologized for how gays and lesbians were treated in Holland. De la Torre is later denied a merit raise at Hope College, and he accepted a job somewhere else. Students organized a rally in support of De la Torre because of his support of the LGBTQ plus community. In 2006, openly gay professor of art history John Hansen was refused tenure by Hope College president, despite support by the faculty committee. And in 2006, that same year, openly gay Hope College student Jason Burns was harassed and had his car vandalized. And then in 2009, President Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, expanding the federal hate crime law to include crimes motivated by a victim's perceived gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. This was in response to the brutal murders of both Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. And it's important to note here that Matthew Shepard was a 21-year-old gay man who was brutally attacked and tied to a fence post, where he was found 18 hours later and then died 4 days later from his injuries. And this incident occurred because Matthew Shepard was a 21-year-old gay man. And then in the fall of 2009, Hope College administration banned filmmaker Dustin Lance Black from hosting a discussion on his Academy Award-winning Milk at a sexual forum held on Hope College's campus. And as a response to this, the students formed Hope is Ready, which was an organization designed to explain to the public and the Hope College community that Hope was ready for these kinds of conversations. The film was then shown by the community at Park Theater instead several months later. And in 2010, nationally, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was repealed by the US Senate vote.
When Bill and I moved to Holland in 2003, we became part of the PFLAG Holland Lakeshore group. And at first the meetings were rather small, and I think we had people who came to those meetings, young people, who were talking about their friends, who had a friend that their parents threw them out of the house because they were gay or lesbian. And I think there were people in those meetings that afterwards would look to find out where in the community and maybe some of them themselves have taken in a person or two whose family had thrown them out. And after that, we got more parents that were coming in saying, my son or my daughter has come out as gay, what can I do? And one of the helpful things that we do, as Carol mentioned, is just to provide support, exchange phone numbers, but we also provided literature about what it means to be gay, and we kept meeting and inviting them to keep coming back and become part of our community.
First of all, when you attend a PFLAG support group meeting, the mission statement is read, and the acceptance from that mission statement is something that makes your heart beat. Because for me, I realize I'm sitting in Holland, Michigan, in Grace Episcopal Church, in a PFLAG meeting around these wonderful moms and dads with their own gay kids, and listen to how they talk about their children. They love them.
Every one of our PFLAG meetings, especially if we have people that have not been to the meeting before, we open with reading someone volunteering to read a welcome statement and another person reading the purpose statement. And so I'm going to read what the welcome statement is for our organization. Welcome to this month's meeting of Holland Lakeshore PFLAG, Parents, Friends, and Families of Lesbians and Gays, PFLAG. It's a national organization that promotes the health and well-being of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender persons, as well as their families and friends. We offer support to cope with an adverse society, education to enlighten an ill-informed public, and advocacy to end discrimination and secure equal rights. PFLAG provides the opportunity to dialogue about sexual orientation and acts to create a society that is healthy and respectful of human diversity. To make our meetings more comfortable and secure places for everyone, what is said here stays here. Confidentiality is important to all of us for one reason or another, and we must respect each other's rights at all times. We earnestly welcome new members and encourage everyone to attend as many meetings as possible for the benefit of each individual as well as that of the group, because it is when we no longer feel the need for PFLAG that PFLAG needs us the most.
It's like, this can't be happening in Holland, Michigan. That was my biggest revelation, was being around these lovely parents who would do anything to help their child or others' children feel loved and accepted and not strange. So that was the most wonderful feeling.
My name is Krista Anderson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an LGBT affirming psychologist here in Holland. I also facilitate Gender Safe, which is a support group here for the transgender community as well as their family, friends, and allies. I'm a mom of two 19-year-old boys, one who is transgender and one who is cisgender. Coming to Holland in '99 and starting my practice as a new clinical psychologist from Ann Arbor, it was really a shock to me because I didn't really know what I was walking into, as far as a lot of the clients that I was serving were pretty guarded and not comfortable being very open in a lot of areas of their life. But particularly, I worked a lot with teenagers at the time, and particularly teenagers who were questioning their sexuality or their gender identity, even if, like, they wouldn't often even talk about those issues or feel like it was safe to do so. And so it kind of really started pulling at my heart because I, from an early age and in my training, have always been very LGBTQ affirming, and got some specific training in my graduate program, and that was something that I felt really strongly about.
My name is Jill DeYoung, and I prefer they, them, or she, her pronouns.
I'm Owen Beard. I am 21 years old. I use he, him pronouns, and I identify as a gay male.
I have spent the majority of my life in Holland. I was born here, I was raised here, and I still make my home here.
My name is Kelly Palan, and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Jen Adams. I'm an Episcopal priest here in Holland. I've served as rector at Grace Episcopal Church, so had pastor since 2006. But I came on staff at Grace as an assistant in 1994, and the year prior was a seminary intern for the summer here.
When you're young, your world is very, very small. It's your block or your street, your house, pretty much. And then, of course, staying in West Michigan down in Fenville was substantially different. That was not a good place to be anything other than cis, white, straight individual.
It was strange because I and like my family I never thought it was bad to be gay, but I definitely didn't think it was okay for me to be. And I think part of that was I didn't know anyone, and it was never talked about. I think it probably would have been a little bit different if there had been someone who I knew was gay.
I felt genuinely called to come and be at Grace Church, and had enjoyed my summer here as an intern. And like I said, I had some friends in Kalamazoo and had met some folks here in Holland. I think it's an absolutely beautiful place to be. I loved the opportunity to be here near the lake and to be in a congregation like Grace. And so I had no questions about coming here. But I did have some questions after a while about staying here, whether or not I could be fully myself openly in the way that I need to be, as both as a priest and just as a human being. So the questions came later than the initial move.
My church, I believe that it was really in good faith, but they adhered to the love the sinner, hate the sin kind of idea when it came to homosexuality, along with most other churches in the area during that time, I think. And I really believe that the people there would have welcomed someone from the LGBTQ plus community, and they would have been warmly greeted. I think they would have invited them to stay for coffee and cookies and encouraged them to participate in Bible study or Sunday school. But I also think that they would have been sort of prayed for or preached at and given this subtle or sometimes not so subtle insinuation that they were welcome there, but not really as they were, that we were going to try to change them, to make them right, to fix them. They would have been welcomed through the doors, but I think our love would have kind of prohibited their full acceptance.
It was both, I think, Holland being a place where it just wasn't talked about, because I do think there have been gay people here and people part of the community here for so long. I just think a lot of people didn't talk about it and they couldn't really be open. So I think, Holland, it was a big reason why I didn't have a lot of experiences with people in the community. For sure.
That's its own process too, which I think it is for so many LGBTQ people, that and that you come out in phases in different pockets of your life, and that was true for me as well. Now, my experience is I'm someone who's lucky in that regard, that almost any time I have come out with family, friends, with the congregation, it's been more than a warm reception. It's been a loving reception. But the larger environment here wasn't like that. So at different points in my time here, there have been different ways in which I've decided how out to be in any given moment. And now 12, 14 years ago, more than that, was, once you're out, you don't come back in. You don't find yourself making the same kind of deep decision over and over again. But for the first 10 years easy that I was here, it was a complicated going over and through that question over and over again. And I was working on that in myself too, in terms of claiming my own identity. I was 24 when I came here, 25 when I moved here. So I was still doing my own internal integrating as well.
People didn't talk about it at work, where I worked as a HR professional. It's a very close-knit community, so coming in as an outsider took some time to really navigate the community. What is expected of one moving into the community, how the churches are really an integral part of this community, how family is very integral as well. And then, being an ally of the LGBTQ community, it was really different because there wasn't support for the community like now there is for out on the lakeshore, the community center here. Schools didn't have the support needed for families. Workplaces didn't have it. While they had, they always have the federal laws. They didn't have things such as the ERG group to support LGBTQ communities and their employees as well.
So there's Dustin Lance Black in town, and of course the kids on the Hope College campus are pretty excited. I'm talking about the LGBTQ kids on the Hope College campus who know full well Dustin Lance Black is gay. And they want to have him on campus and to talk. He's a screenwriter, my goodness sakes. Look at the work he's accomplished in his life. They want to learn from him what it's like. How did you get started, and so on and so on. They also wanted a roundtable on discussion for sexuality. Lance, how did you make it in business and in the world, knowing you're gay? So on and so on.
So the film Milk was just about to come out, and to have this young director, that Dustin Lance Black would agree to come to Hope College was quite amazing. Unfortunately, it started with an individual student giving an invitation to a person and then coming onto campus to find support. Typically at Hope, if someone's invited, it's people say, we're going to do the invitation, and they get the support together and then they go. So in some ways, this student got kind of caught in this procedural piece, but there was an outpouring of support from academic departments. I mean, you can imagine a director, right? And yet, because of some personal things in his life, not just him identifying as a gay man, but some other things that had been going on in his life, the college said, absolutely not, he can't come. This was another time, I think, when our students were saying, we've got an idea, we've got this great opportunity, and then this piece comes in.
Boom, that's when I'll just say the hammer came down at Hope College, and they weren't going to allow any such roundtable discussion as that.
I'm sad because I think there were people that were hurt in all of that. But in a way, it brought attention national attention, it brought campus-wide attention, and it brought a coalition of people together even more closely to say this, what happened here was wrong. And this was a case of an administrator at the very top saying, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. And that was his mistake, because he forgot what a college is and what a college should be doing. And it blew up in his face. And I think led to a lot of the kinds of changes that have come about since. Hope is Ready wanted to, it came out of this whole experience, the importance of letting people know that Hope really is ready to have these conversations. And in fact, Hope had been having these conversations in these different pockets, in these different places. Things were happening. But they wanted the campus as a whole to recognize that Hope is ready to invite people to campus. Hope is ready to have a support group, a student support group. So one of the things they wanted to push for was a recognized group. Now, there had always been, ever since John Stout started, there had been a student group. And even when the college was telling its funders and conservative folk, it's not official. Well, I'd like you to know what exactly is official. When they were getting money, there was money coming, the Dean of Students office that was helping support the actions they were doing. That makes them official to me. But they didn't have that stamp of they're as official as any other student group on the campus. And they did want the stamp, and it was important. But they were still meeting and still discussing and still, having gatherings on campus, even though at one point apparently they were told they couldn't meet on campus. I think what they were told is that they couldn't publicize meeting on campus. Anyway, there were ways to get around it because there already was a support group. Kristen Gray was terrific in that. She stepped forward to provide the counseling center as a place where the students could gather, and she stepped out of their space and gave them their space, and she wasn't there supervising or anything else. So they were looking for the right to advertise their events, the right to bring people to campus to speak, to gather, to be recognized. So they were pushing for those things, and they were saying Hope is ready for this.
So then we get into the 2010s, and in January of 2010, a community group organized and formed Holland is Ready, which was a play off of the Hope is Ready name, but expanding to include the entire city of Holland, which both included the student members of Hope is Ready and the community at large. And the first meeting had 150 people attend to discuss what could be done in Holland and at Hope College to increase acceptance for the LGBTQ+ community members. The next month, Holland is Ready held its first steering committee meeting and focus group meetings. Continuing into that spring, Holland is Ready petitioned Hope College's Board of Trustees to change its policies to become more accepting of LGBTQ+ students, faculty, and staff. In May of 2010, Reverend Bill Freeman asked the Holland City Council to adopt an ordinance that bars discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity in housing, employment, and education. In July of 2010, Hope College Board of Trustees states that while they support fair and kind treatment for people of homosexual orientation, they will not change their 1995 policy that condemns homosexual acts. That same month, a full-page ad paid for by the Family Research Council at Request Foods ran in the Holland Sentinel. Among other things, the ad claims that homosexuality can be changed and homosexuals have higher levels of mental illness and substance abuse than heterosexuals. It urges readers, let's not grant special protection to voluntary sexual behaviors that are actually harmful to individuals and to society. In October of 2010, the Holland Human Relations Commission voted unanimously to recommend that the Holland City Council adds the anti-discrimination language protection for LGBTQ+ people in the city's Fair Housing Ordinance, the Human Relations Ordinance, and the Equal Opportunity Policy. While all of this was happening at the national level, in 2011, the Obama administration announced that it will no longer support the Defense of Marriage Act. And then in January of 2001, following protests, the Hope College Board of Trustees announced a new statement on human sexuality that states, "This biblical witness calls us to a life of chastity among the unmarried and the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman." Over the next couple months, the Hope College faculty called a faculty forum and distributed 80 to 90 stories of the history of the experience of being LGBTQ plus students, faculty, and staff on Hope College's campus over the years. The document was called Hope College Stories of Hidden Discrimination, Giving Voice to the Silence. And then in June 15 of 2011, Holland City Council rejected a proposal to allow the city attorney to look into amending the city's ordinances and policies to include protections for LGBTQ plus people. The vote was defeated 5-4 after 4+ hours of public comment. The following day, a group called Until Love is Equal, based in Grand Rapids, was formed to raise awareness of the moral and economic impact of equality in West Michigan. And in June of 2011, Gary Glenn, the president of the American Family Association and the Campaign for Michigan Families, vows that his organization will financially support any candidate who runs against any of the Holland City Council members who voted for providing anti-discrimination measures for the LGBTQ plus people. So then in August of 2011, more than 150 people march on Holland City Hall demanding that the city changes its ordinance to provide protections for its LGBTQ plus citizens. That fall, supportive and affirming Hope College faculty, staff, and students form a Safe Zone sticker training where faculty and staff could attend a student-run Safe Zone sticker training and learn about how they can be affirming of the LGBTQ plus students at Hope College. 82 faculty members went through this program. In October of 2011, Bill Freeman, a minister of Interfaith Congregation, is arrested after he refuses to leave City Hall after a Holland City Council meeting where he urged the council to expand protections to its LGBTQ plus citizens. And it's important to note that Bill Freeman is the one who initially brought these issues to City Council. So then later that year, he was arrested for doing the same thing but refusing to leave. And then in November of 2011, Wayne Klimparens is elected to Holland City Council, and he ran on a campaign being openly supportive of expanding the protections for LGBTQ plus citizens, despite his opposition being heavily funded by the American Family Association. And then between fall of 2010 and the spring of 2011, Holland is Ready began to hold a film series about LGBTQ plus issues at the Park Theater in Holland. The films shown were For the Bible Tells Me So, Big Eden, The Mormon Proposition, Transamerica, 7 Passages, and The Birdcage. And in the fall of 2011, Holland is Ready organized as a 501c4 organization, and Unity, Michigan hired a field organizer for Holland. In 2012, Holland is Ready was awarded the Holland Human Relations Commission's Social Justice Award for its work and efforts to make the city a friendlier and more welcoming community to the LGBTQ plus people. In that same year, plaintiffs April DeBoer and Jane Rossi filed a lawsuit challenging Michigan's ban on adoption by same-sex couples. It was later amended to challenge the state's ban on same-sex marriage. And then in June of 2012, the Michigan Department of Civil Rights held a public hearing in Holland to take public comment on the state of expanding civil rights laws to include protections for LGBTQ plus people. A couple months later, in August of 2012, a Holland is Ready grassroots garden party took place at Jonkers Garden titled Growing Change in Holland. This event had 21 local business supporters listed for the event. And then in December of 2012, Bill Freeman, who was the gay rights advocate that was arrested in City Hall previously, received the Holland Human Relations Commission Social Justice Award. And then in April of 2013, Hope is Ready held a Silence Isn't Always Golden a major fundraiser masquerade ball at DeVos Place. And then in June of 2013, Holland held its 10th Pride Festival, which was its first ever outdoor Pride Festival. Previously, the festival had always been held indoors and often in a very private setting, but in June of 2013, the festival was held outdoors for the first time in Centennial Park on a Saturday afternoon. And it continued into the Park Theater in the evening with a happy hour, a lesbian comedian, a drag show, and dancing. And in June of 2013, in the United States versus Windsor, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional, and same-sex couples are entitled to federal benefits. In November of that year, the Holland Sentinel published its first same-sex marriage announcement. And in March of 2014, a judge ruled that Michigan's same-sex ban on marriage is unconstitutional and violates the rights of equal protections under the law. So then in March of 2014, a judge ruled that Michigan's same-sex ban on marriage is unconstitutional and it violates the rights of equal protections under the law. The state of Michigan appeals the United States Court of Appeals, staying the judge's ruling pending the appeal process. And in 2015, locally here, Holland is Ready and Holland Area Pride collaborated with PFLAG Holland Lakeshore to form Out on the Lakeshore, its first brick and mortar location for an LGBTQ plus organization in Holland. And then in June of 2015, the Supreme Court made a decision ruling that same-sex marriage was legal in Obergefell v. Hodges. This was a landmark civil rights case in which the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that the fundamental right to marry is guaranteed to same-sex couples by both the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. The 5-4 ruling requires all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the insular areas to perform and recognize the marriages of same-sex couples on the same terms and conditions as the marriages of opposite-sex couples, with all the accompanying rights and responsibilities. And here locally, the next month, Hope College extended medical insurance benefits to same-sex married couples. And the following month, in August of 2015, Gender Safe, which stands for Supporting All for Equality, was formed as a spin-off group of PFLAG Holland Lakeshore, aimed at supporting the trans and gender diverse community. A few weeks before our 13th Pride Festival, after seeing so much positive movement within the LGBTQ plus community, both nationally and locally, we then saw a tragedy that affected the LGBTQ plus community nationally and even beyond, when we saw the Pulse nightclub tragedy, which was considered at the time to be the worst mass shooting of the time in the entire country, with 49 dead and another 50 wounded. And although this happened in Orlando, like I said, it affected the entire LGBTQ plus community. And this was during a time that there was a lot of hope, and it also was a setback because it provided the idea that, while things were looking good, we still were not safe. And in June 30th of 2016, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, announced the Pentagon was lifting the ban on transgender people openly serving in the military. In November of 2016, Holland Pride hosted One Nation, a demonstration of unity at Holland's Unity Bridge. And in May of 2017, Out on the Lakeshore Community Center finally opened its doors. And in November of 2017, a coalition of 5 students and their supporters who wanted to see tangible reform in policy and funding choices on the intersections of race and sexuality at Hope College formed and collected 95 stories, modeled after the 95 thesis of Martin Luther. The goal was to advocate for policy change by collecting stories of racism and homophobia from the student body that they had experienced while attending Hope College. And in December of 2017, a Hope College student, Joshua Cam, and Michael Vasquez, a Western Theological Seminary student who had been part of developing the 95 Stories, organized a public demonstration during Vespers where they threw leaflets, staged a walkout, and ripped posters from protesters' hands during a televised portion of the annual Christmas tradition, highlighting the way students had been mistreated at Hope College due to the students' diverse and intersecting identities. And in February 18th of 2018, Out on the Lakeshore moved to its current location at 451 Columbia Avenue in Holland. And in April of 2018, 95 Stories held a Love Thy Neighbors Day, which coincided with a Hope College campus visit weekend. This Love Thy Neighbors Day included cookies and flyers that were passed and information for LGBTQ plus students and students of color so that they would know what resources and policies are in effect at Hope College. In June of 2019, Holland's 16th Pride Festival, and the biggest attendance at the time with over 2,000 people, was held in Centennial Park. And this festival began Friday evening and ran through Saturday evening with bigger entertainment and more events than the festival had held in the past. And then a few months later, in September of 2019, Out on the Lakeshore hired its first ever director to begin moving the organization beyond what was able to be done by just a working board. And in fall of 2019, Hope College established their first openly gay LGBTQ plus student organization called PRISM. The mission of PRISM is to provide an open space for any LGBTQ plus persons and their allies to develop community and promote inclusion at Hope College. This organization strives to give the Hope community a place to learn, support, and advocate for the rights of LGBTQ plus students. PRISM does not require LGBTQ plus people to out themselves to attend the group. And then in October of 2019, a flyer was distributed by the then mayor of Holland, Nancy DeBoer, and the city council at-large candidate Vicky Lynn Holmes at a mayoral forum at Freedom Village that was stating why they would not be voting for protections in housing and employment for LGBTQ plus people, as it would provide, quote, special protections for some. This was seen as a momentous and a significant point in which the city council and mayoral election was largely focused on. Mayor DeBoer lost the election to current mayor Nathan Box, and Vicky Lynn Holmes lost the current city council member position to Lynn Raymond, who ran on affirming the rights of LGBTQ plus Hollanders. So then in December of 2019, a group of 200 plus community members organized by Reverend Jen Adams, Sarah Van Tongeren, and Jeff Sorensen petitioned Holland City Council to ask for City Council to create a non-discrimination ordinance to provide protections for LGBTQ plus people. The City Council was presented with a letter from 35 local mental health therapists that urged this action. In January of 2020, City Council member Myron Trethewey made a motion, supported unanimously by the entire City Council, to allocate the city attorney to begin to look into options of what it would mean for the City of Holland to adopt a non-discrimination ordinance. This is where the movement was defeated back in 2011, but passed in 2020. March 25th, 2020 was the date that was originally set for the city attorney to present his findings to the City Council. However, due to COVID-19, this date was rescheduled. Around the same time, workplace equality was brought up as a major issue nationally, but one of the three cases that was brought up was a Michigan native, Amy Stevens, who was a transgender woman that was fired when she stated that she wanted to start coming to work dressed as a woman. And in June 15th of 2020, Bostock versus Clayton County, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the 1964 Civil Rights Act does in fact protect gay, lesbian, and transgender employees. from discrimination based on sex. That same month, Out on the Lakeshore held Pride in the Community in Holland. It was a way of celebrating Pride without a regular festival due to COVID-19, where supportive local businesses were highlighted and then encouraged folks to support them. Bags were given to all the current and former Pride sponsors with large and small rainbow flags, buttons, and stickers to promote Pride, even without a festival. Many businesses and organizations displayed all of these flags and other forms of Pride support throughout the community during the entire month of June, but also especially during the week that Pride normally would have been. And the first annual Run with Pride, a virtual 5K, was held with over 80 people running or walking virtually to celebrate Pride in a different way. And then July 8th, 2020, the rescheduled City Council study session meeting was held where Ron Vander Veen, the city attorney, presented his findings and recommendations that the City Council go forward with a non-discrimination ordinance to provide protections from discrimination for LGBTQ+ people, as well as other protected classes. Hundreds of supporters gathered outside to show support for this change as the council members went inside the City Council chambers for this recommendation. The next week was the first reading of this ordinance, in which the Holland City Council voted unanimously to adopt the first reading of the Protection Against Discrimination Ordinance that would provide protections in housing, employment, and accommodations so that individuals would not be discriminated against because of age, race, national origin, color, disability, education, familial status, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, height, marital status, religion, source of income, or weight. Several of these categories, including sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender identity, were not included in the original housing ordinance for discrimination protections. This was the first reading that passed unanimously, and for Holland City Council, 2 readings are required. So then on August 19th of 2020, the second reading took place, and the Holland City Council voted 8-1 in favor of adopting its first ever non-discrimination ordinance that is one of the most comprehensive non-discrimination ordinances in the state of Michigan. Letters of support from 70+ faith leaders were provided to City Council, and the meeting lasted over 8 hours, with 6.5 hours devoted alone to public comment. And many supporters stayed until 2 a.m. outside the building, physically distanced because of COVID, resting on camping chairs with their phones, listening to what was occurring inside City Hall when the decision was finally rendered. Hundreds of people gathered before the City Council meeting and filled the parking lot to show the community support for adopting the non-discrimination ordinance. Rainbow flags, music, posters, and hands waved, showing the support of the city as the council members walked into City Council, and then again when they walked out at 2 a.m.
So Holland is Ready had come together in 2009, and we were inspired by the group that was Hope is Ready, that there were 3 Hope students that had begun this group called Hope is Ready. I'd met with them, had supported them, and asked if they minded, actually, if we used the language of Holland is Ready to make this a bigger moment and a bigger movement. And it was, Hope is Ready came to be because of the Dustin Lance Black invitation that was then rescinded by Hope College. And because that situation at Hope College had been told in the Sentinel, there was a lot of public reaction both ways. But it was the first time that I had seen public reaction be relatively even, that there were as many people speaking up in support of having a gay individual come and speak openly at the college as there was people who thought that should never happen. And so just seeing it be more even felt like it was a moment to say, okay, Holland, what can we do? And so we pulled together Holland is Ready in 2009, and that was simply gathering people and saying, what can we do? That was a literal question we started with. From that, then Holland is Ready was born. And it was in some of the meetings of Holland is Ready, the initial meeting had over 100 people present and were just eager to do something supportive. And it was in those meetings that one of the ideas was to seek a non-discrimination ordinance in the city. And at leadership meetings and sort of huddles around when and how to do that, we weren't in full agreement about when and how to do that. There were some of us that felt like we wanted to be more sure that we could get a majority of council members at least open to the idea before we moved forward. There were others who wanted to go now and do it. And while we were in those conversations, an individual in the community brought it forward. And so we didn't actually initiate the first process of beginning a non-discrimination ordinance conversation in the community, but we immediately obviously jumped in because we were supportive, and now it was out there.
10 years ago, the ordinance is proposed, and at that time too, you had a very supportive Human Relations Commission in the town that was recognizing the leadership of Jen and others, and giving awards for these sorts of things, and that has an influence. They don't have the policy making power that the council does, but it definitely is an indication of where a lot of people in the town were thinking.
So at the time that this individual brought the non-discrimination ordinance forward and presented it to council, Holland is Ready was really focused on education and relationship building in the community, networking in the community. And we shifted at that point, and our primary focus became the ordinance. And now that also involved education and networking and relationship building, but it also became more advocacy as well, and letting people know exactly what was involved with this ordinance, talking to council members, talking to the larger community about this. And at that point, it was council's call in terms of when they would actually take it on, when there would be a vote. We did a lot of work that was door to door, that was, again, getting as much truthful information out about what this was and what this wasn't before the actual vote took place.
With the Holland is Ready working on the non-discrimination ordinance, trying to get that passed in 2011, I believe. I did get involved a little bit with that and did some canvassing. It was not probably my favorite thing to do, being a blind person. It was a little bit challenging going up to people's homes that I wasn't familiar with, but I did what I could and went to the city council meetings. And I remember one of the city council meetings where this was back in the fall of 2011, I believe, where people were sharing their stories. And I remember going with Karen, and it was filled, lots of people there, lots of people sharing their stories. And again, just being shocked at some of the views that people have of, and some of the fear that people have about people who are gay or transgender. And again, feeling compelled, like I need to do more. I'm not doing enough.
Well, I'm a relatively optimistic person to begin with. And so even going into this, I knew it would happen at some point. I hoped strongly and was committed to helping it happen at some point. At that point, I knew it would be close. And honestly, going into that evening, nobody knew for sure. That was one of the hardest evenings I've had here in Holland, was the night of the actual vote, because easily over 80% of the people who spoke were in support. We knew we had several council members who were in support, but there were also a few that hadn't shared one way or the other how they were going to vote that night. We had packed the council chambers. There were lots and lots of Hollanders Ready sweatshirts around the room, and surprising voices that spoke up from the corporate world, from some pastors, a range of ages, people we didn't expect who showed up to speak and did. And again, the percentage was so high that the vibe that night was that it had more of a shot than we actually expected. And then the first 4 council members to speak and indicate how they were going to vote, there were 4 who were in favor, and there were only 5 left. And at that point we thought maybe one of them, all we need is one of them. At that point I actually texted Beth, my spouse, at home and said, I think you should come. I think it's gonna happen. And because we only need one more. And then the final half hour, 45 minutes, I don't remember how long it was. At the time it felt like 3 days of listening to the final 5 speak about why they weren't going to vote no was honestly heartbreaking, especially the ways in which it was framed. Some indicating how much they cared and actually did support us, but still voted no. And you know, a couple with reasons why not that I almost had more regard for than I did those who indicated they were doing something caring. And then just feeling the emotion in the room that night sink, and the grief involved, and disappointment, because we had all gotten our hopes up as we not only moved toward that night but moved through it.
So I was at the city council meeting, which I recall vividly, which was a 5-4 vote, with a deciding vote cast by the mayor at the end of that long and emotional evening. So I mean, I was involved just with many other fellow citizens here in Holland in promoting equal justice for all people.
It was the summer between my 3rd and 4th years in college when the first NDO was shut down by the Holland City Council. And I wasn't out at the time. I wasn't even out to myself, but I had been kind of following the newspaper articles and the clips and what was going on, and I was really struck by the words of Pastor Bill Freeman and how I had never really heard a pastor or anybody of faith advocate for protections for the LGBTQ plus community. And I can remember feeling a sense of safety and security from his words, but not really knowing why. And I can also remember feeling all of that leave when I had found out that the efforts had failed. You know, I just remember feeling all at once that sense of insecurity now rushing in.
Well, that was a great disappointment, but it wasn't a surprise. And indeed, that it came that close in a community that was reputed to be as conservative, socially conservative as Holland was, particularly at that time, was in a sense an indication of things are changing, and they're going to change here, they're changing nationally. We're all part of a cultural tide, and the sea is coming in. And then with time, different people were elected as mayor and as city council people, and that kind of foretold what was going to happen.
But that night also was a significant turning point in many ways. It generated more support, and it meant that Holland was engaging this in a way that Holland had not before, and that we weren't going away. And so it unfolded in a variety of different ways from there forward. But that night was a turning point, not in the way we'd hoped it would be, but in a way that did also crack it open in a way that it just didn't close up again. So one of the things that happened that night of the first vote on the ordinance was that at least one, and probably a couple, if not 3 of the council members who voted no that evening did so on the premise that it was not council's work to do. that they did not want to make a decision or legislate, because that's not how hearts are changed or opened. And that's an argument we hear often, and it's an argument often used in civil rights work as well, that this ultimately is about turning hearts. So why would we need ordinances or legislation in order to do the kind of work that is different kind of work? But those two things aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they're incredibly complementary, and there's data to show that when laws are changed, hearts can move along, and when hearts are changed, they can help move laws along. I mean, it is a real mutual process. And so I saw that evening as a failure of some council members to own what only they can do. None of us could pass that ordinance, but they could. But what they did was indicate that there's also hearts that needed changing, and conversations that needed to be had, and education that needed to happen. And that was work that we could do. So we claimed it. There were many people in that room that actually became part of the leadership of Holland is Ready, who we hadn't even encountered before, but they saw the work that we had begun. They heard that excuse, frankly, from some council members, and said, all right, we're gonna dig in, and that's what we're gonna be about over the next few years. And so we dove into the work that can only be done relationally, that can only be done over a longer haul, and that is a kind of work that is about changing hearts, opening them, changing minds, opening minds, the work that is telling our stories and listening to other people's stories as well, and finding a place and a way to move forward together.
So I almost didn't move to Holland because there wasn't an ordinance. And I have this really interesting habit of checking local news. And so when I was moving to Holland, or when we were contemplating moving to Holland, I was checking the local news, and I was living in Richmond, Virginia at the time. And so I was really shocked by what was happening in Holland, and actually made me fearful to move here. And I remember telling my husband at the time that if we're gonna do it and we're gonna move there, something's gonna have to change. And so I made a vow that I was gonna work on helping fix the wrongs. And so it was just a weird thing to show up and sort of full circle now to come back to this moment. So 10 years later. But moving to Holland, when I moved here, most of my clients, I was getting a lot of LGBTQ clients that were experiencing a lot of trauma because of what had happened. So it was also interesting. I was reading it before I arrived. I was getting the narrative as it was sort of unfolding, and it was heartbreaking.
Once we got into 2012, Holland is Ready just continued with all its good stuff. I kind of went, to a subcommittee for the Pride planning. And then by 2013, 2014, when we had Holland is Ready and the Holland Pride group doing all their individual work, if you will, as entities, it became like, wait a minute, why don't we, there's strength in numbers, let's come back together under one name. What do you think? So many meetings ensued on that.
Holland is Ready then evolved along with PFLAG and Pride into Out on the Lakeshore, which then created actual physical space that was dedicated to the kind of work that we knew needed to happen in this community.
I'm not patting my back, but I think I offered Out on the Lakeshore, and it was chosen. Like I said, there's been so many exciting things happening since I've lived here again. And so it really got into 2015 when this became a plan. Under one name, let's become a 501c3. Another year went by, 2016, boom, we got that 501c3.
Hi, my name is Amber Marie, trans girl. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I had moved down to this area in March 2017 from Muskegon. In November 2017, just before Thanksgiving, I took a chance and walked into the doors of Out on the Lakeshore and got plugged into resources and things I never knew existed here.
It felt like most of the Holland population, it was like the small portion of the population was actually against it. It was just the fact that no one had done anything about it yet in this 10 years since it happened, since the 10 years ago. It felt like people would be on board with it.
I remember when Jay Peters on the city council ran for mayor, and he ran actually on a platform to create a non-discrimination ordinance, and that LGBTQ rights matter and it's important. And he lost by something ridiculous, like 100 and some odd votes. And it was devastating. And I remember meeting with my clients like the next day, and they were devastated. Sort of as that was, they felt like that was the last gasp. And so I wrote, after that day, I'll never forget it, I wrote an email to Jay just to thank him for the hope that he gave our community and what that meant to me, to my clients. And then he wanted to meet with me, and we went and walked. And I started just sharing with him all the stories and all the trauma. And that I will never forget, that meeting sort of lit a fire under me that, okay, it's time. We have to do something. We were so close. It was 190 something votes. There has to be work to be done. And so I just really used my position of power as a therapist, and at that time in the community, pretty well known, started networking my butt off. And I would like, anyone that would call me back, I would talk to them. And I remember going to like multiple prides and like meeting like Fair and Equal Michigan, and just that's how I started meeting people and connecting with people. And so I did that multiple times. And then finally it seemed, that would have been the 2019 summer, early summer. It felt like, oh, okay, we're ready. It's time. And I was organized enough and connected enough. There was enough people connected with Jen, and there was enough people and momentum behind it.
In 2019, it looked more and more possible. Like we were approaching a point at which we wanted to bring this to council again, because it would have a shot at getting through. And there were people who ran on this as really one of their primary issues that they would support if they were elected. And there were also a couple of folks who in their run for election or re-election said very clearly they wouldn't support it, and that didn't help them. And so it became clear that the time was right for us to bring this forward again.
When the NDO was reintroduced, I kept my distance at first. I opted not to speak at the council meeting that was held in December. I felt somewhat fragile. I didn't have the kind of armor built up that I felt like a lot of my LGBTQ friends had, because I just didn't have that kind of time behind me yet. I still cared a lot about the opinions of other people. I still was really willing to deny parts of myself to gain their acceptance. And cruel, hateful words still could spiral me into a depression really fast that took a long time to come out of. So I just wasn't strong enough yet to do that.
And it got on Facebook and through Gender Safe that we needed people at City Hall just for a show of support in December. I was like, okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to be there. And apparently it got out to everybody else too, because the public comment on that night took over an hour and a half. And on that night, I had not intended to speak at all. I had showed up to support you, Jeff and Jen and Sarah, and to support the leaders, but not really say anything. But having been trans myself and listening to someone who was speaking make rather ignorant comments about men in locker rooms and bathrooms, I felt compelled to speak. And I can definitely tell you that everyone in the room, everyone around me was like, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. But, Reverend Jen, who became my pastor, and Ruth Lowry, who was a pastor, just kind of sat behind me, got me calmed down enough to speak, and then I said my piece and sat back down. And I was told I did a good job. I did a good job that night.
My name is Jeffrey Sorensen, and I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the director at Out on the Lakeshore. I started in 2019 as the director, but I have been in West Michigan for about the last 10 years.
So one of the other things that was true in 2019 is that the people who we needed to help lead this process were present, and Jeff and Sarah were significant parts of that, and so were all of the people who had played some role either in the previous run or in getting Out on the Lakeshore to this point, or just different organizations in this community that were already far more accepting and inclusive and wanting to see this happen for the sake of Holland. So it just felt like the stars were aligned for this, and leadership was part of that.
And I really acted as kind of the PR and publicity person for the entire movement. Everything from designing the flyers and the newsletter emails that were going out to being the media contact for everything, and either being interviewed myself or facilitating the interviews that happened. I think that when I first started Out on the Lakeshore, that was something that was really needed, was someone that had that PR and marketing background, and it's a big reason why I was selected to fill the role. And I think that just translates right into the ordinance as well.
Living through that trauma where you felt powerless was also simultaneously such a loving gift that the LGBTQ community and allies gave each other by when it got uglier, more and more people started showing up outside. And so it did start to feel hopeful. I think on the backside of it, a lot of people, part of the other role I did is I just had a lot of communication with city council. I was just trying to, and as much as I was being in the face of people that were supporters, I was also just trying to keep an ear to city council and try to understand what was going on their end. And I think there was a few times where I was worried we didn't have the votes. And it went back and forth, it seemed like, just depending on how the wind blew. And that, I think I held the weight in so many ways, and I know so many people did. I just was so worried that it was going to be for nothing. And that was going to be another wound and another thing that all while living in a pandemic. It was really stressful. I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, we lived through a piece of history. I mean, gosh, but it was really stressful. And just the feeling of sitting there in the audience week after week after week and getting berated, both personally, professionally. It has a way of sort of feeling like it erases your humanity.
The price of staying silent was too high. I was too hurt, I was too broken, and there were just too many lives at stake. So at that point, I chose to speak. at the council meeting that happened in July about how belonging to the LGBTQ plus community was dangerous and threw us into a game of survival that most other people didn't have to play.
This more recent bringing forward of the non-discrimination ordinance was a time when I was pleased to be able to speak. It felt like it was necessary and good and right to be a little more involved. The evening of the vote, we got the PRISM group, the Hope students, together and walked over to City Hall together with them. We didn't go in, but we were outside, and those students were able to see this gathering in Holland. And our students oftentimes don't leave campus. And so one of the students said to me, all these people are here and they're all supportive and this is Holland? And I said, yes, this is Holland. And then I had a chance to introduce them to some people. The students were amazed to be meeting people from out on the lakeshore, or local pastors, or Hope College alumni who were in the parking lot supporting the non-discrimination ordinance. And it meant a lot to those students to see that this is the community where their college is located. So that was really a gorgeous moment.
I was worried. I still was optimistic, thinking we're going to win, but I also thought it was going to be a very close vote. As Mayor Box continued with his speech, though, just his tone and some of the things he said in that very short couple minutes of him talking, I think helped kind of anchor me in, we're gonna win and this vote's gonna go through. I still thought it was gonna be a very close vote. I was shocked when I was listening to all of the council members say yes or no, and there was more yeses than I thought there would be.
It's time for us to stand up. It's time to invite our neighbors, all of our neighbors, to sit beside us. It's time to call them by name, to recognize and acknowledge who they are. It's time to bring people together. It's time to let them know that they truly belong and that we are glad that they're here. Why wouldn't we? It's time to protect the rights of everyone equally. One standard, one rule, one ordinance, one Holland. Holland, let's send a clear and unequivocal message. We love our neighbors as ourselves. We appreciate the gifts that they bring to our community. We protect the rights of everyone equally, and we celebrate the value of everyone that calls Holland home, because this is Holland, one Holland, and we all get to live here. Kathy, please call the roll.
Corbin?
Yes.
Hoekstra?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Bird?
No.
Peters?
Yes.
Garcia?
Yes.
Tre Goodhue?
Yes.
Arnshorst?
Yes.
Mayor Box?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We are not done this evening.
So then on September 9th of 2020, Holland City's non-discrimination ordinance went into effect. In December of 2020, because of their work with the non-discrimination ordinance in leading the community, Jeffrey Sorensen, Reverend Jen Adams, and Sarah Van Tongeren, along with Out on the Lakeshore as an organization, won the Holland Human Relations Commission Social Justice Award for Community and Government Relations. With all of this work done with the ordinance and the PFLAG Holland Lakeshore board determining that it was time to retire for many of them, PFLAG Holland Lakeshore decided to dissolve as a chapter of the national PFLAG organization in order to better serve the LGBTQ plus community locally. And instead, PFLAG's programming and gender safe that was a spin-off of PFLAG were absorbed into Out on the Lakeshore's organizational umbrella. The PFLAG's program became Out on the Lakeshore's Family and Friends program, while Gender Safe's name remained unchanged. And then in June of 2021, to further support for the LGBTQ plus community, the City of Holland Mayor Nathan Box proclaimed June as LGBTQ plus Pride Month. This was the first ever proclamation of its kind in Holland, affirming and acknowledging the LGBTQ plus citizens in the City of Holland. So this is just scratching the surface of the history of the LGBTQ plus community here in Holland. You've heard from many people who experienced a lot of this firsthand, but there are many others who also came before us whose stories have not been told. That is just a piece of the vast history of the LGBTQ plus community here in Holland, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface. There are many stories that you've heard today that tell a lot of both the positives and the negatives of the history, but there are many stories that have yet to be told. So thank you for joining me and learning more about the history here locally in Holland of the LGBTQ plus community.